But since this is Sean's project, I'm going to let him introduce our featured speaker today and tell you a little more about her.
Thank you, Stacia. So for those of you who missed last night, you're going to miss my hand-eye coordination thing because I totally forgot to bring my show and tell today. You guys forgot to remind me that there's another talk today, so I'll blame it on animal health. When we were in the airplane, Susana was telling me about the fact that in July, National Geographic did a segment on birds in trouble, especially ocean-dwelling birds. The gentleman who was doing it took him about a year to do it, and one of the places that they focused on was Punta San Juan. And there's a picture in there, page 133, I believe.
32.
That has Susana and some of the other folks that work there on some of the guano fields. So if you have National Geographic at home, I'd encourage you to look at that and see Susana, who's about this big in there, but it's still her. And maybe if you want me to, the next time we're down in Peru or next time she's up, she can autograph it for you. So for those of you who don't know, the whole reason why we got involved with Punta San Juan was because of the penguin building. When we built it 4 years ago, we were looking for a project to become involved with. And even at that time, we didn't know if we knew we were going to have a warm weather bird and cold weather birds, but we didn't know if it was going to be black-footed penguins or Humboldt penguins. And Randy came back from a meeting and said, hey, St. Louis Zoo and Brookfield Zoo are looking for a partner in the Humboldt Penguin Consortium. And so we got a hold of the Humboldt SSP and said, hey, we're thinking about doing this. Are there birds available? Would it make a good tie-in? They said yes. Kind of the rest is history. Went down there for the first time in 2014 to get a lay of the land, and that was the first time I met Susana. And a couple of years after that, we were involved with the penguin census. So we were up and down the coast counting penguins in all sorts of scenarios, and also getting a chance to take other people to the reserve. This year, we were going to send some folks to be involved with the guano harvest, which again, Susana will talk about in her presentation. Unfortunately, the Peruvian government sometimes is wishy-washy. Is that a good term? Wishy-washy? On planning. And so they were planning to do the guano harvest, and they decided not to. So literally hours before we were going to book plane tickets, they decided, okay, we're not going to do it this year. We'll do it next year. So we had to reorganize. So this past week, I spent a couple days down in Lima, and Susana had the pleasure of doing overnight bus trips with me and overnight plane trips with me, just so we could talk about not only our future in the consortium, but also some things that we can continue to do or look at as ways for us to be more involved with conservation down there. So I think there are some really fruitful conversations that hopefully will continue to develop as we go through the next couple of months. So that gives you a little bit of background on how we got involved down there and why we continue to be involved. But for our guest speaker, Susana Cardenas is originally from Peru, but she spent some time in the United States in New York City when she was young. Up to like 5th grade, right? Sixth grade.
Elementary school.
And so she spent a lot of time at the Bronx Zoo. During one of our trips up here, I thought it was important to talk about because she said that one of the reasons why she got involved with conservation to begin with is because when she went to the Bronx Zoo, she would hear people talking about their work with the animals and conservation. So all of those stories that we tell during our keeper chats and conservation talks about how the younger kids that are listening to you can make a difference when they grow up, she's standing right there. So those things that we all do, you all do when you're out there, make a difference and can lead to those people who make a difference as they get older. So after she got a little bit older, 6th grade, her parents wanted to move back to Peru and make a difference in Peru. So Susana went back down there, went to, let's see if I can get it right this time, the University of Peru, Cayetano Heredia.
Muy bien.
Nice. And after she towards the end of graduation, she started getting involved with Punta San Juan. She liked that project down there, spent some time down there during her undergraduate years. Then she went for postgraduate work up in Vancouver, got her master's, went back down to Peru, and about that time, the previous director of Punta San Juan was doing other things and moving on. Perfect timing for Susana to move in around 2011.
Yeah.
And she's been there ever since and doing a great job. You'll see during her presentation that she's a great ambassador for the entire, not only the birds that live down there, but for conservation in general in Peru. So with that, I won't talk anymore. I'd like us to all welcome Susana Cardenas.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you. You guys hear me okay? It's good? All right. All right, since my presentation's a little long, we're going to start right away, but just also to thank you guys, not only for having me here, but also, again, for the work that you do. It's true, this is not a made-up story to fit in well with the zoos. I did go to Bronx Zoo. I really wanted to be that person that was out in the field, and it was from the boards and the talks and the information that I saw at the zoo that I could feel there was a way to, connect to do conservation. And I was growing up in New York City, very non-wild area. And I followed that as I studied biology in Peru, and when I went back to Peru, there was not much talk about conservation or opportunities in conservation. So I think being very persistent has been one of my or stubborn, one of also the key aspects of trying to push to try and make a difference in work and in what I love. So through this presentation, I hope I can take you to the best place for me, that's Punta San Juan in Peru, and you'll get to know it a little bit better. All right, so we start going to South America and Peru. That's right here on the map. Punta San Juan is located in the southern coast of Peru. So we are, although we are very close to the equator, we're right below Ecuador. Punta San Juan is at degree latitude 15, so it gets very warm there. The ambient temperature can get very high, especially on the coast. That's a desert strip. The waters off of Peru are part of the Humboldt current system. So the Humboldt current is an upwelling current that brings, cold water full of nutrients up to the surface layer. When it's in touch with the sunlight, all those nutrients create a great amount of phytoplankton, zooplankton, which are prey for fish species like the ones that are up here on the slide that are Peruvian anchovies. I put the anchovies, and I start with the anchovies because they are a very important prey base for the predators, the marine predators that are on the coast of Peru. And they're an immense amount. It's a huge amount of this small pelagic fish. And they're also important for the economy of Peru. Fishing, industrial fishing, is one of the, along with agriculture and mining, are the top 3 economic activities in this country. And this, I think, picture represents the amount of fish that you can imagine are out there on one fishing trip. And this is also obviously a threat because it's a competition for all these predators to have industrial fishing. Well, they're also trying to, they rely on this prey base. Peru alone is also known as a heavyweight champion of for this fishery. In Peru alone, with anchoveta alone off the coast of Peru, there have been years when it has fished more anchoveta than China, for example, in international waters. So it is a very large fishery. The ecosystem on the coast is is an upwelling current ecosystem. There's only 4 in the world, the ones that are highlighted here on the map. And Peru is a very one of the most productive sites. It's been compared, different research which is has the most productive upwelling. The Benguela current and the Humboldt current are the top competitors, the most productive. And Peru, again, is even though it's not as productive in terms of phytoplankton, it's producing the most amount of fish. All right, now to Punta San Juan. So Punta San Juan's here on the map, highlighted by the arrow. And we can see on the map that on the coast, we can see the trench. It's this like wrinkle on the map that runs parallel to the coastline right here. And that's when the ocean, of course, floor gets deep, and that's where that upwelling is occurring. So Punta San Juan has a privileged location because the distance from the shore to that trench is very narrow. So the upwelling is occurring close to shore. That makes Punta San Juan a very windy site, cold waters, and it gives, for the predators that are living on that coast, it gives them a higher probability of finding food nearby. The upwelling, more fish can be there, and we always say it's like living close to a buffet or a bunch of restaurants or a grocery store. You use less time to find fish, which you need to raise your chicks or your pups. So annual productive is high, not only because the penguin is saying so, but also because different authors have researched this, and it's been even categorized as one of the most productive locations in the world. So now we're going to watch a short video and take us all to Punta San Juan. Okay, so talked about the fish a little bit, talked about the coast, and I think it's important because in Punta San Juan, it starts out as a bird conservation area, and these are the amounts of seabirds that we find in this place. It's a peninsula, and it's about 133 acres in area. I think the zoo is 200 acres, so smaller than the zoo. But the amount of birds that we find and the density of those birds is very high. So this is a patch of birds seen from a drone, and these are the red-eyed cormorants that pack very densely at the site, and they are the responsible ones for all that guano that makes this place also important. Other seabirds that are also residing there are the Peruvian boobies and the Peruvian pelicans. Together, the cormorants, the boobies, and the pelicans in Peru are known as the guano birds. The brigade. And all this guano, for example, at Punta San Juan, that has also been protected. The guano layer has been protected since 1987 for penguins. And penguins burrow in the guano. So they make their burrows in the cormorant guano. That's that largest, those huge aggregations of birds. So it's kind of a collaboration between species. The Humboldt penguins burrows in the guano are the ones that are proven to give more success to the chicks. They burrow on the edge of the cliff. The wind chill comes in through the burrow. They have shade, and they also can isolate and have just an apartment like for their families. Which in a cave, it gets a little crazy because they get aggressive with the other animals, very territorial over their nests. So it makes a great place. And Punta San Juan now holds the largest colony of Humboldt penguins on the coast and the second largest in the world. We have the amounts of penguins here. All these guys, these are just the 3 cormorants, and all these are Humboldt penguins, right? And some of them, a lot that we also don't see on the front row looking towards the ocean. Other animals that live there are South American fur seals, which can also be found in large numbers on the rocky beaches. And we have South American sea lions, also packing very closely together on the beaches. So there's a beach with about 8,000 sea lions in one site. Very dense aggregations that you don't find in many other places. And all of this, this place starts off from the interest in guano. So in Peru, in the 1800s, fleets of boats from England were already coming to harvest the guano. And they did pretty intense guano harvesting on the islands, especially on the islands. And here we have an example of an ad for the U.S. actually of the guano that was getting exported and sold as fertilizer for crops. And on the other side of the screen we have Guano Picchu. So in Peru we have Machu Picchu. You guys know that huge archaeological mountain? This is an 8-story mountain of bird poo. Accumulated on Chincha Islands, on one of the islands that was very heavily harvested. If you look closely, you can see the people. There's some people there, some carts. So a lot of bird poo, right? So bird poo, imagine that amount of bird poo, imagine the amount of birds that have to poo all that, imagine the amount of fish that the birds have to eat to poo all that. So it's a lot, right? And the country was interested in making money off of that. There was a commercial interest for these guano harvests to happen. So guano harvests happen now run by the country nationally, not for the English anymore. That changed in the early 1900s. But it's a harvest that involves people, workers that are doing hand labor, shoveling the guano in very artisanal manner. And about 400 workers go to the islands and the peninsulas to harvest the guano. A big part of the work that's done at Punta San Juan is that every time there is a harvest, we work with the government, coordinating as far as in advance as we can to get this harvest to be done in a way that it will not impact or mitigate the most impact possible on the penguins, on the pinnipeds, on other seabirds, and also maybe other things. Maybe that their camp doesn't bring rodents, or that they don't throw any pollutants in the water, or all sorts of things that can come with a campsite of 400 people coming into a peninsula. So the guano harvests are something that still do go on, and this is actually what's maybe happening next year, should be happening next year. And we're actually happy it didn't happen this year because it was running fast. It wasn't programmed for 2018. It was running fast, and it was in the end it got called off because it's too big of an operation to be done carelessly, and we were not letting them. It's kind of our job to try and make that, you have to do it right. But interestingly, in the history of Peru, in 1909, a guano administration company, a division of the government, is created already with the goal to recover guano birds. Okay, so back again, the English had exploited, harvested, and the birds had already gone down. Peru says, we want this guano, we want to use it as national fertilizer for our crops to improve our agriculture, so let's recover the guano birds. They bring scientists, ornithologists from different countries. We had ornithologists come from American Museum of Natural History. They come, and one of their ideas was, well, put some guards on the islands, take care of the islands, but also how about if we put walls on some of the peninsulas so that you can increase the nesting habitat for these birds. And that's what how Punta San Juan starts. So Punta San Juan is a peninsula, southern coast of Peru, that got walled off in about 1946 as an experiment to make an artificial island. So it's a wall, just a concrete wall. It's not that tall, but the idea is that with a wall, you can keep, there's the wall in the middle of the desert, and you can keep predators out and keep wildlife in. And I put a penguin picture, but their idea was cormorants. Now, to these conservation efforts, our group and other groups have also been defending and making a good case for the guano reserves. And they've turned into a protected, we call it a national protected area, but it's like a park along the coast with other 32 sites. So these dots here with the little labels, there are 32 reserves like Punta San Juan that exist on the coast of Peru that together make one protected area. It has a very long name. I'm not going to say it, but it's a very, but it's the idea is that the birds can move north, south, depending on changing ocean conditions, and we promote the accumulation of guano. Guano harvests happen, and Punta San Juan is part of this system. So at least this category of protected park also increases the possibility of vouching for nature here. We have now a national decree since 2009 that gives it a higher status for conservation. There's Punta San Juan on the map. Now, though along with different, different entities, we have guano, we have protected parks. We're a university, it works with zoos. There's different interests all in one site. So a big part of our job, as we mentioned, is negotiating for nature and negotiating for the species that live there. And we do that through the information that we collect in the field and give advice to the government that authorizes different types of decisions or activities that can happen at the reserve. But some of the things that we can't control or negotiate with or against is climate and natural occurring shifts in the ocean. So here we have a time series of sea surface temperature anomalies since the 1800s, and we have anything that deviates positively from zero is a warm event, and everything that is negative here in blue is a cold event. So water temperature is constantly changing, and when it's really high, when the warm water comes in, it's usually due to a very strong climatic signal called El Niño Southern Oscillation. And El Niño hits the coast of Peru usually every 4 to 7 years. And we're going to show here a animation of how the water temperature changed. You're going to see it get red. It's 5 degrees warmer than what it should be in the 1997-98 El Niño, which was a very strong, intense, and long event that unfortunately had very strong effects also on the population numbers at this site. So here's a story using some fur seal data. These are counts of animals, abundance of fur seals on one of the main colonies since 1984 till 2014-15. And we see that we can just concentrate on the maximum numbers there. You see that in the 80s and the 90s, there's about over 1,000 seals. But then when that 97-98 El Niño hits, there's a wipeout. There's a wipeout at the site. The animals are going farther away to look for food. They can't find the food, so they either unfortunately die. All the chicks, all the pups died, and they're going. The adults are fleeing to find other sources of food. This not only happened in in San Juan, but also in Peru, and it declined top predator numbers between 75 to 85%. So these reductions in animals that take at least 2 to 4 years for the females to become reproductively mature can have a very big impact on the population numbers. So those reductions get all these animals get reclassified in Peru as endangered, and also get on the red list because this decline was very severe for their populations. So Punta San Juan starts out as a research project and is now more involved in monitoring for conservation, and starts building up, doing capacity building and education, and all of this because this, let's say like this crisis, this decline in the population numbers, we thought that it was still very important to keep this place safe so that the animals can come back, and also try and help these populations to improve so that they're not gone. So the monitoring continues, and I always say, we say in Spanish, we take our hat off, like, we respect the fact that this place was still had funding, still had people working there, even though the animals were gone. So the good story is you keep on monitoring, and you can tell this story, that the populations were able to recover even after a 5-year period of 0, 0, 0, 0, and then boom, the animals come back and they start using a site that was very important for them, historical breeding sites. And this story is repeated with the penguins and with the sea lions and the birds as well. So that's nice because it's a success story in the end. You just have to wait a while with top predators. They're not fish, they're not urchins, right? So it takes a while. Here we have some pictures of the 90s of that beach. These are the fur seals, old picture, fur seals on the slope in the intertidal. So high density years. Then after the wipeout, then a slow recovery, some of the animals coming back, and now density is back and as almost as it was. And the good thing is they've not only come back in the amounts of numbers, but they're also using different beaches. So here we have in the orange squares some of the beaches that were used in 2003, and also how they've spread. So they're even spreading out outside the wall, and they're using different sites, and that means they're also, doing their thing, and they're not just limited to 1 or 2 beaches, but they're using the habitat. So that was an El Niño story, but there's also a lot of other things that sum up now on top of El Niño that are coming from human-born activities. We find animals with entanglements. We can find an animal with, from an oil spill, or find diseases related to pollutants or find pollutants in blood from fertilizers or pesticides. We have the fox there because the fox enters the reserve to eat the cormorants, but he can also be outside the reserve interacting with feral dogs, trash, or chicken farms, and he can be a transmitter of other diseases. So through our work, we're also trying to do a surveillance over the other threats that are also affecting these populations. So wildlife monitoring is a big part of our work. We do a lot of that from the coast. And when people are down in Punta San Juan, they help us a lot with counts. Counts involve not too fancy, binoculars, telescopes, tally counters, and a lot of patience, because you can sit on top of the bluff in a blind and see something like this from your binoculars. So that has to get turned into data. And we like our data in different categories. So we like to know how many adult males, females, juveniles, and pups or subadults there are. So here on the top, pictures, on the top there is sea lions, and on the bottom are fur seals. And the idea is to distinguish in the fields in different age classes, so we can understand, how much part of the population we have there is a breeding population, so we can understand if we're working in an important breeding site, and which maybe efforts we have to prioritize where the bulls and the females are, so that they can get their breeding done successfully. And we also do this with the penguins. Penguins are counted in different age class categories, and also if their nests are being successful or not, how many eggs, how many chicks. So here we have adults, an adult pair, a juvenile, and a chick. And these counts have allowed us to also see the recovery and document this recovery in the different species. Here we have the counts, the numbers of fur seals and the years, and this is how they've recovered and stay at Punta San Juan. And these are the maximum numbers, and they've shot up since 2001. In sea lions, we can tell the same story, although they leave and come back. And if we look at all the maximum counts, they've also recovered successfully. And then we have penguins, which also, although they do have a moment in the year when they drop, that's okay because they're out looking for food before breeding. They do a post-molt pre-breeding feeding trip that's about 20 days, but they come back, and they've also recovered successfully at the site. So we're very happy about this, not only in one species, but in many of our species. We also look at different beaches that give us indicators for how many pups or how many chicks are being produced each year, and this varies, again, according to the ENSO or other warming events that could occur in the ocean. And also as part of our research, we're looking at the foraging ecology, so what these animals are eating. And here's a story, well, it's also from fur seals because it has a long data set. And if we look at, we collect poo from fur seals, from sea lions, and also pellets from cormorants, and look at all the fish bones and the otoliths, especially, or squid beaks that are found in these scats and pellets, and we can identify the diet that these animals are eating. So in many years, so it's more than it's about, 30 years there almost, about 29 years, we know that fur seals like 5 things, 5 main prey items. But when we've divided this data set into before El Niño and after El Niño, we have a different story. We have that 95% of the diet before El Niño had 5 food items, and now 95% of the diet after El Niño has only 3 food items. So diversity in the available food for these animals has changed. And this is something that we see in fur seals, and it's probably something we're working through the sea lion data set currently, and we're trying to replicate it. Penguins are complicated because they have that liquid poo, and we cannot collect the the otoliths from them. So it is hard to do this story with penguins, but we're trying to get some stable isotope work done with them to help us out. All right. Behavior. So a lot of our work also involves looking through these binoculars on the slopes in the blinds, and that allows us to understand what the animals are doing naturally at the breeding beaches from the coast. And some following, when we follow marked animals, we know what individuals are doing, more like the work that you guys do here with your known animals at the zoo. So this is a story about females that had pups, fur seals that had a mark on them, just bleached fur and some tags. The bleached fur really helps you figure who's who from 25 meters above. And we found that what we were looking at is the proportion of time that they spent on land with their pup versus out looking for food. And found that in the 90s, 45% of their time was out at sea. But nowadays, they spend 65% of their time out at sea. So that's 20% more. And the only relationship that we found with this is that also their body condition is diminished. So our female fur seals used to weigh 60 kilos. Now on average, they're weighing 49 kilos. And this not only happened in these 2 sets of years, 20 years later, but it's happened in a lot of our animals. So here we're looking at the weights of females in the 90s, and then we have a drop in the weights in 1997, but that's expected because that horrible El Niño story I told you. The problem is that after that, there is a new size in fur seals, and it's smaller. So in general, these are the animals that we worked with, and we weigh like 50 animals each year to understand what their body condition is like. And we have 60 kilos versus 48 kilos. So again, the general weight for them is diminished. We did the same type of, we looked at the weights of pups and adult males in the same species, and their weights were the same. Their weights haven't changed. But right now, it's on mom. So to understand what they're doing in their efforts while they're out looking for food, we're using some help from some sensors or transmitters to look at what their foraging trips look like. Penguins get a GPS and a TDR, a time depth reporter, to understand how they're doing, how far they're going out foraging. Here we have some trips in green from adults with chicks, and in red we have adults with eggs. The ones with chicks have to come back faster. And here we can look at some of their dives. This is a dive profile from one penguin. Dove about 70 meters, that's like 200 feet in the wild. So they can dive very deep, but the majority of their dives, fortunately, are on the top layer of the water because food is accessible to them not so deep. And we've also put on other sensors to look at how far they're migrating in that post-molt trip, and they're going all the way down south to close to I see this purple dot here, close to Cape Horn. So they can also go far. That's a 20-day trip, and that's quite a ways. These GPS are also put on the seabirds and during breeding. And during breeding, we do find that they are getting their food and coming back and raising their young around Punta San Juan. This is a map that shows penguins, cormorants, and boobies all together, and they're using that area efficiently. And this is a map of GPS on fishing boats. So if I told you this was a sea lion or a fur seal or a penguin, you'd probably believe me, but there's also a lot of activity going on in that area with the fishing boats that could be overlapping with the animals. Again, this is feeding trips on female fur seals, just to give you an idea what the information that this stuff is giving us. The majority of this is depth, and the majority of the trips are here. The dives are here between 10 and 40 meters, but these animals can dive also up to 180 meters, which is about times 3, so I think it's like 560 feet in depth. So animals have great diving capabilities, but we're trying to understand with this technology how they're arranging to get their food today. And this is what their feeding trips look like over the trench. And what else do we have here? Oh, we have the health. Okay. So to understand health and what the animals are facing in terms of pathogens and disease, we work with veterinarians that help us safely anesthetize animals, and that allows us to collect also a bunch of samples that are processed for different research. It could be, biotoxins in the water, nutritional stress, ocular health, and also the safe sedation of the animals allows you to be able to glue on that transmitter that can be basically impossible in an animal like this. Is a fur seal bull that you wouldn't want to get near to, especially during the breeding season, if he's not safely sedated. And we've been doing this in different animals. These are female fur seals that have pups, go almost in a straight line towards the trench and come back. They have to take care of the little ones. These are the male fur seals that go out towards the trench and hang out. And these are the South American bulls that don't breed and are bachelor males that can go island hopping, and there's no problem because they don't have any responsibility. So different age classes do different things. And through the research, we're trying to understand that. And finally, we also look at mortality. There's people on the ground doing daily surveillance if we have any dead animals and what could be the cause of this. They're conducting necropsies. This is a short story from 2016, our summer. We found a lot of animals coming in with hooks. And unfortunately, the necropsies had these hooks on their esophagus. That was the obvious cause of death, and also interaction with fisheries. And these are the hooks that were found inside the animals. Doing a little research, going to the port, talking with fishermen. These hooks belong to the mahi-mahi fishery, which is not common in Marcona. Mahi-mahi is from, or dorado or perico is from warm waters. And documenting how the fishery had acted each year, or how where the boats had been, we found that in 2016, a lot of these boats with this type of long line were very close to shore. And here, what happened is, comparing 3 years, is that this occurred in February each year. So here, if we just look where the red box is, the red box here is over blue, here it's over blue, but here it's over orange and red. So that's the water temperature changing in 2016 and making the warm waters coming closer to shore, the fishing boats going after these fish, putting all that gear and all those long lines and hooks in areas that are very close to breeding areas for fur seals, sea lions, and penguins, and then we get, mortality from these hooks. Okay, then we also do capacity building on site. There's a lot of people that come and help us. They stay for 3 months in the field, and from their stays, they not only help the program, but also produce some science. They present at Congress and also are working on their thesis or publications. And as community outreach, this was a great project that we had going for 4 years called Building Bridges with Punta San Juan, where we worked with the community to get them to interact with the reserve, even though there's a wall. This works for conservation. And we wanted to get that message across and not them be intimidated by this wall. So we did guided tours to San Juan, to the reserve, also went out and did community activities with them in town, and also trained youngsters on biodiversity and their local nature. These are just some shots of the guided tours in town, everyone with binoculars, walking on trails. This has helped set up guidelines for the current tourism that occurs at the reserve. Some shots of the community activities out in Marcona, and the youth training, spending times with teenagers and trying to inspire them about conservation and nature. So currently, we always work on strengthening these local partnerships. Having also our people engaged in the community is very important for us and for the future of the reserve, and replicate this example and serve as a model. All the good things that are tested and run in Punta San Juan well, we work with the government to give the guidelines so they can do it in other islands and peninsulas. And some of the challenges now are promoting responsible tourism, and of course, while empowering conservation leaders. And Punta San Juan is not me, it's a lot of people, collaborators, researchers, students, volunteers. Here are some of the faces, but I'm very grateful. And we're a big team. Some people are in Peru, some people are in other countries. But once they go to Punta San Juan, I think majority engaged, and there's a lot of people behind this that are helping. And that includes also Kansas City Zoo and the other zoos that are part of the consortium, as well as the government that we work with in Peru and the university. And that's it. That's me. So I'm happy to take your questions. Any questions? Yes.
Yeah, I'm just curious about the land predators.
Mm-hmm.
You talked about the wall being put up to keep the predators out, but has there been much in the way of research on the land predators on the other side of the walls to see if they're thriving without that source of food?
That's a great question. I'll repeat the question so everyone can hear. If we've done any research on the predators and how they're doing the land predators since the wall was put up, and how they're, if the effect of the wall is impacting them in any way. Okay, so before that wall was put, there wasn't evidence of breeding cormorants at San Juan. So there was just cormorants that would stop over and go. And we haven't found any evidence that there was such a huge bird patch there. So that's one thing. The land predators that come in through the wall are usually the Andean fox as the normal predator. And they still sneak in and take their occasional cormorant and also sneak out. And what we do, well, they have an immense range. Like they go up to the highlands and come through, like the Andes, come through corridors and then come down to the coast. There's very little known about this fox. We tried to put a fox project together. I'm not saying we're not, it's not something that we've efficiently or done well so far, especially because it involves tracking an animal that can walk 90 kilometers in one night. It's tough. Other predators that come in now, also things have changed a little bit in that wall. We have feral dogs that sometimes come in, feral cats also. It's more, we're also close to town, so that also something that, well, it wasn't pre-existing, it's more like an invasive, along with rodents. And the other thing, well, that just comment that the wall serves as a barrier for trash. Plastic bags are now also something that wall is keeping out. Yeah. Another question? Yes.
How are you guys working with local fishermen to prevent animals from getting harmed from their hooks?
Yeah, definitely. We it's basically working directly with, in Marcona we are, I'm sorry, the question is how we're working with local fishermen to prevent animals from getting harmed with hooks. We do have a good relationship with the local fishing guild. Fortunately, in Marcona, they are pretty organized, and they have a guild of, under one guild are the 600 fishermen that work off of the boats there. For example, this story with the hooks, all these boats were not local. They were from northern Peru. They were from a whole other area where, because this fishery is not like a native to this fish wasn't native to this area. So when we have had situations like this, and also in the 90s there was an issue with bycatch in penguins, there has been work with the fishermen, not so much to respond, but to stop the use of the gears when that's happening. So it's still definitely in the works. It's hard to say stop fishing. It's hard to, because what do they get from it? But we're constantly working with them in workshops or sending them the reports. And now what we're doing as a side strategy is to work on the shellfish that they're interested for selling. So what we're doing is helping them a little bit with the science that they need to also strengthen the relationships, because a lot here is about them also being ambassadors for the reserve, not just saying stop fishing, because that's almost a no-go these days. Any other question? Yeah?
After you guys had the bout with El Niño, and you saw that prey species go down from 5 to 3, did you notice that they were overfishing those species, and that's why the populations of them weren't coming back?
Well, I've talked to them about those two species and what happened, and also looked at some of the landing of those species, and one of them, they've confessed that they've fished out. Yeah, the silver side. So and they say, no, señorita, yeah, we screwed up. It was summer. They tell, after day 3 with the fishermen, they start talking. And, yeah, it's like, but day 3, huh? And it's that I don't know if it's going to come back or how, because there's other species that then compete and take over, right? So there still has to be some more also research or looking into the caloric content of the current prey, how that's interacting. There's a lot of interesting questions there. Yes?
I know that El Niño can sometimes have an effect of creating a red tide. Do you guys deal with red tide at all in that part of the world?
Off of those pinnipeds that got gastric contents and samples and from their feces while they were sedated, 2 types of, domoic acid is called, and ácido oxalico. You know it, right? No. The ocadaic acid is called, yeah, we have a publication on that being described off of the fur seals. And now some penguin samples are also being analyzed for that.
That's what I was going to ask. I assumed it would affect the sea lions and seals, but does it also affect the penguins?
I don't know right now. To the moment, I do not know. We haven't really seen any of the neurological effects on the animals. So they have exposure to them, and we don't know where exactly, they have gotten the exposure. I mean, the good thing is that their health is okay. The problem is, again, like when you have all the summed up effects, right? If you have an El Nino, they can't find food, then you have the red tide, and then they're they're in nutritional stress, and that's when mortality starts to happen. And even in a necropsy, sometimes you can't even tell because it's all summed up together. So that's always very hard with the teasing things apart. So one of the current things is still running through those samples and working with the healthy animals to understand the exposure. Those animals that we found the exposure to the red tides, they're okay, and they were fine. So it exists, but I think it's when you get into a crisis that it can affect negatively. Yes.
When you guys, you said that the wall is helping keep out like plastic bags and stuff from getting into the nature reserve. Have you found that plastic bags are still being ingested and causing like impaction and death?
Yeah, we haven't found one of these like stomachs full of plastic bags, but we find microplastics in the poo. So it's part of the diet now, fortunately. So it's part of the items that we classify also along with the fish bones and the squid beaks. Now plastic is part of, unfortunately, is something that's also getting looked at. And we also entanglements from bags and things, not just before it used to be just fishing lines and fishing gear, and now we've passed over to more domestic use items or the normal plastic bag that's also causing those entanglements. Right, any other? Yes.
You guys do like a lot of community outreach to try to get the local populace involved in the work with the birds, or is there much interest from the locals, or how's that?
Well, people love penguins. This is about community engagement and what we're doing with the local folk and the birds. We were doing until 2017 because our community engagement initiative was grant funded through Disney Conservation Fund. So that worked out really well for 4 years. We got a lot done, but right now we don't have the funds to do that. We'd love to continue. To do some activities with local people because they are the ones responsible. This place Marcona is the town right beside the reserve. It's 15,000 people, and it's the bags that they throw that will be directly coming to the reserve. So that's very, I think it's very important to work with them, and a huge target audience are the fishermen and their children because those people can interact directly with the animals. They do care, and especially about the penguins. Like no matter where you go, how rich or poor you are, people love penguins. So penguins are a great hook for getting people involved, and it's something that we're looking to continue. Someone else is yes.
Is there any shark or whale research in this area?
So you're asking about the predators. The higher predators.
It's a great question, Tracy. That's something that we've talked about a lot.
I know, yeah. So we don't have sharks. We don't have
I don't
sharks.
believe it.
We have a lot of sharks actually, but we don't have warm-blooded eating like sharks. We don't have great whites or sharks that are eating the seals. Orcas occasionally do come in. Now we're seeing more, but there's been more sightings in Peru in general for orcas. From after a few years, a couple orcas, and these are not like your Seattle or those Northwest orcas. These are the mammal-eating orcas that come in just very sneakily, and they eat 40. It's like a fursular sea lion per minute. 40 minutes, 40 animals gone. So they come very rarely, but they do. And then that they don't really have other predators. Then it's all this like enso that kills off the population, and they're coming back up. I think that's why also when they have a bunch of years to replenish, the numbers rise again, and then there will be another dip. The idea is that they can recover to a level where they're not going to in danger of extinction.
My suggestion, Tracy, was to keep the commercial divers and whatnot away from where they should be. I suggested orca signs, killer orca signs. And actually, you had another idea.
Yeah, but maybe you should say it so I'm not politically incorrect.
So the other idea from Susana was you will get some bacteria disease, and the politically correct part, we can just leave that part out of it. Just bacterial disease that will affect you in certain ways that you won't have kids.
The Latino thing, like the macho man, is very strong. It's like, so what is it called? Yeah, so I suggest that, but they'll say, no, señorita, no hay orcas, no hay orcas. We're out on the boats, you're not. Don't tell me, we're not on the boats. So, yeah.
So we're close to 1 o'clock, if not right at 1 o'clock. I did want to point out one thing from Susana's presentation that some of you might have noticed, and especially some of you from the education staff who do the shows, and you're like, oh, that fur seal looks just like that sea lion. And our shows talk about the difference, how the seals and sea lions are. So those are actually fairly closely related animals. They are like our sea lions. They walk on their front legs, and they can drag, or they can walk or hop on their back. But they were named by the people that were hunting them early on. The fur seals were named by those because they have
the fur, after the otters, they have the densest fur coat. So they were basically looked for, it was European boats that were also coming for the pelt industry. They were looking for otters and fur seals.
So a great example of how common names can be very misleading. But if you have some kid who's from South America or South Africa, they're like, oh, what you said isn't true. We have seals in our country. You can explain that to them of, okay, that's not exactly correct. That's a common name, and here's why.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, everybody, for coming. Please help me thank Susana.
Thank you.
And we look forward to having you back up here in a few years. Eh?
Okay.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Have a good day.
Bye. Thank you.